Hi, I want to spend some time just orienting us to the idea of literacy as social practice as you're reading through the Cope and Calancis book, and as you get ready to read the Davidson book. There's some key ways of thinking about social practice that we'll talk about, and these diagrams have been useful to me over the years. This is one that one of my doctoral professors used, and I was able to use in my dissertation, showing individual psychology as being nested within interpersonal sorts of relationships. And the way we do interpersonal relationships is usually enacted inside some kind of institution, whether that's the family, whether it's a school, whether it's a doctor's office, whether it's a business. All of these social institutions give us the contexts where we tend to interact and have these interpersonal interactions. And influencing all of the social institutions that we participate in day to day, and thus the interpersonal interactions that we participate in. We have cultural and historical forces shaping what those institutions are. And this sort of nested approach to things is pretty important. And keep in mind that the arrows go both ways. Individuals have impacts on the types of interactions and institutions that they participate in. At the same time, institutions and cultural forces kind of push out on people. Individuals tend to have fairly little influence on this cultural and historical scenario here, but there are individuals who are pretty influential out at that level. We tend to talk about those people quite a bit as being big movers and shakers in history, but also a lot of this cultural and historical baggage that we have. And I say baggage, that's not just all negative, it's all the weight and conventions that we have to deal with day in and day out of our lives, that a lot of those things are developed just in the everyday sorts of social interactions that people have. So I'm going to pull a specific example out here and talk about it. This is one way that I've diagrammed this for children's literature. And children's literature begins with this idea that people make and experience art. We have readers, we have writers, we have authors, we have all of these people that are out there making books. But all of that happens inside of a social world. So I have kind of I guess we can't really see that here, but a lighter gray out here at this institutional level, darker gray down here at the individual and local interaction level, and then individual artists down inside this space here. So I'm just going to tell you what some of these things are. So a reader might give a rating to a book on Goodreads or Amazon.com. That's sort of a social interaction, but the fact that Amazon.com exists or Goodreads.com exists is something that is a new sort of social development. Social media is a new institutional force, but it's also the development of the internet, a bigger cultural historical force that no one of us really predicted or had a hand in inventing, but it's there anyway. So let's think about another one here. So we've got writers and illustrators. Writers and illustrators have to do with publishing houses, self-publishing, the market for children's books, the free market. And the free market is one of those bigger cultural and historical orientations that, again, very few individuals have a lot of control over the fact that that exists. We end up having to participate inside of it, and it shapes some of the possible interactions that we can have in the world. Bookstores and public libraries are institutions where we participate in children's literature, and we have students, parents, patrons, teachers, and so on, all of these people who have specific kinds of interactions inside of a library or a bookstore, and so on. So I even have down here the privacy of your own home. Privacy of your own home is an institution in the modern world that's very different from what may have existed historically. So thinking about the ways that you actually sit down and read a book in the privacy of your own home is something that may not have always been there in the same way that it's there for us now. And this gives us this sense that the individual develops and grows, but the ways that the individual has interactions that give them vocabulary, that give them experience, that give them opportunities to succeed and fail, all of those happen inside of these institutions where we have one-on-one or small group, local level interactions. And those local level interactions in the institutional level tend to be shaped by these things that happen outside at the cultural and historical level. So the upshot there is that when we're talking about learning of reading and writing, that it's at our own peril if we ignore those cultural and historical forces, if we don't put the activity that we're trying to get kids to do inside of its cultural and historical context and give it that sort of appropriate introduction for kids, help bring them into that club, help them know what the institutional expectations are, help them to figure out how to buy into those and so on. If we ignore all of those sorts of effects, then we have the same kids over and over who end up failing in schools. So just a couple of approaches to social and historical approaches to language that I want to make you aware of. One of my favorite books is Foundations in Sociolinguistics by Del Hymes. I think 1974 is when this book came out. And he just goes in to a lot of his anthropological contexts in the Southwest United States. I think he spends a lot of time with the Diné tribe in Arizona, and just talks about how the social and historical impact what he's able to learn about language. And one of my favorite stories is he goes up to some kids because he wants to figure out how to say a particular thing about an animal, and he wants to know what the grammar would be for the phrase, I am the rabbit. And so he comes up to these kids and these young boys and starts asking them to say, can you guys, no, says my connection is unstable. Am I back on? They think you're trying to get me to say, I am the rabbit, which is a trick. You're trying to get me to like a fool in front of all my friends. And he doesn't realize what the context for this. You do something like that in an Indian tribe, and you never live it down. They'll call that kid the rabbit for the rest of his life, or the white rabbit because the white guy made him say the rabbit. They'll make some sort of name up for him, and they will not say this. And what he realizes is that because of the strength of that social thing that's going on there, the conventions of what you do and don't do in a social situation, that in that context, those boys actually cannot say those words. Not to say that it's physically impossible for them to say it, but the social and cultural aspect of what they're doing stops them from being able to say the words. And there are all sorts of situations in our society where expectations and assumptions that we have control what we can and will do. And it's not that we don't have the capacity to do those things. We always have the capacity to do things. I can make all sorts of sentences that don't make sense, but I don't spend my days doing that. I can say, with my elephant, I am picking up the Wednesdays. That's a grammatically possible sentence. But picking up Wednesdays doesn't make sense, and I don't spend a lot of my time making up sentences like that. Some people do that. Nonsense sentences are things that poets and songwriters do all the time, but there are just certain things about the way that conventions unroll and the expectations for purposes and practices that put boundaries on what people do day to day, and the types of individual local level social interactions that we have. That's where we develop our sense for grammar and vocabulary and so on. So we tend in education to leave a lot of those things out. And the Koppen Kalantzis book emphasizes the way that we focus on the cognitive when we don't realize all of the things that are out there shaping cognitive activity for us in social interactions at all levels. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll talk some more about literacy practices in the social arena throughout the week.